Hi guys, thank you, Stuart. Good morning, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this important announcement. I'm Tanya Carrera from Natural Resources Canada, and I'll be your MC for this event. I'm joined by the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, as well as Lowy Gunnewiek, the CTO and Global Strategy Lead from New Wave Hydrogen. So to start, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta and home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. We honor, recognize, and respect these Indigenous people as the traditional stewards of the lands which we share today. I think we can all agree that climate change is a major threat to every community on this planet, as the folks in this region know all too well. Canada and the world need to drastically speed up efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's as simple as that. To do so, we need to use every tool at our disposal, and one of the best tools in our arsenal is clean energy. To reach Canada's ambitious climate targets and leave a healthy natural heritage for future generations, we need the ideas, knowledge, and involvement of everyone. And the announcement for which we are gathered here today demonstrates this. So without further ado, let's get to the matter at hand. Please join me in welcoming the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson, to the mic.
Thanks very much. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome here for this announcement. I also would like to begin by acknowledging that this event is taking place on the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda. The city of Calgary is also situated on the homeland of the Métis. And thank you to New Wave and to Gowlings for hosting us here today for this announcement. We talk a lot about climate change these days for obvious reasons. Climate change is altering our world's natural environment in a myriad of harmful ways. Last year's wildfire season was instructive in this regard, as it showed us what the future will look like if we fail to tackle climate change, a future we must evidently work very hard to avoid. At the same time, climate change is also rapidly transforming the global economy and global finance in ways that are creating enormous economic opportunity for those who approach the transition to a low-carbon future in a thoughtful, a determined, and a focused manner. The global energy transformation is both an environmental imperative to protect our planet, yes, but it is also an economic opportunity on a scale similar to the Industrial Revolution. For Canada to seize the extraordinary opportunities being created by the transition to a net zero economy, we must first accept the scientific reality of climate change and then ensure that this informs and shapes Canada's economic strategy. Les gouvernements du monde entier sont de plus en plus nombreux à prendre des mesures. Our American friends, as folks will know, are making massive investments at a scale never seen before in growing a clean economy through the Inflation Reduction Act. So are the rest of Europe, Japan, and South Korea. And beyond our democratic friends, competitors such as China are also moving aggressively and highly strategically to seize the major economic opportunities offered through the energy transition. China is now the world's largest producer and the world's largest deployer of renewable energy technologies. It is one of the largest manufacturer of electric vehicles and the largest deployer of those technologies. It controls critical minerals value chains, very much including processing around the world. China has made a very strategic bet on the energy transition and has been working on that for years. Here in Canada, we have developed an energy and resource-based strategy in partnership with industry, labor, and Indigenous peoples to create economic prosperity for the future. It includes seizing those key economic opportunities in new and accelerating sectors such as critical minerals and critical minerals processing, battery and EV manufacturing, biofuels, nuclear technology, carbon capture and negative emissions technologies, and of course hydrogen production, utilization, and export. It secondly includes having a thoughtful approach to ensuring the competitiveness of Canada's oil and gas sector in what will eventually be a declining global market. Such an approach requires aggressive action to reduce emissions from the sector to ensure Canada will remain competitive in a world that will value the lowest carbon products. It also means enhancing the focus on non-combustions of applications for oil and in the case of natural gas, focusing on ultra-low carbon hydrogen. Il s'agit de travailler à la mise en place de réseaux électriques qui continueront à conférer au Canada un avantage concurrentiel important. It involves regulatory and permitting reform that will enable good projects to be built quickly in this country. Just recently, Minister O'Regan and I launched a new regulatory and permitting action plan that aims to do just that. And finally, it very much includes furthering economic participation and economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Alors que ce travail est en cours dans tout le pays ici, en Alberta, l'opportunité de leadership est incroyable. And while this work is underway right across the country, here in Alberta, the opportunity for leadership is incredible. We have already seen significant investments in Alberta in the emerging low-carbon economy. This includes the recent $12 billion Dow investment in the world's first net-zero petrochemical facility in Fort Saskatchewan. Today, I want to talk specifically about hydrogen. It is something on which this federal government, as well as several provinces, very much including Alberta, are focused. It is an area of significant personal interest to me, having been the CEO of a company in the hydrogen space for many years. In December 2020, the federal government released the Hydrogen Strategy for Canada, and since then we have seen significant progress. Numerous projects have been announced and are rapidly advancing, including the Air Products facility in Edmonton, which is nearing completion, which is a $1.6 billion clean hydrogen facility. Au Québec, TES Canada construit un projet d'hydrogène propre de 4 milliards de dollars. And in Atlantic Canada, companies including Everwind and World Energy Hydrogen are making significant progress towards production facilities that will enable export of hydrogen to Germany and to other European markets. Today, I am pleased to announce investment of $11.8 million for 8 hydrogen projects in Alberta and 2 small modular reactor projects. Ces projets sont le reflet du travail intéressant et innovant réalisé dans ce pays pour non seulement développer de nouvelles technologies, mais aussi pour les mettre à l'échelle et les déployer commercialement. Examples of projects receiving funding today include innovative fuel systems, dual fuel technology that will allow for heavy-duty trucks to displace diesel fuel with hydrogen. This dual fuel technology will reduce diesel consumption by up to 45% on average and can be used in existing engines. ATCO aims to develop the first commercial, fully hydrogen-heated building in Canada. It will serve as a demonstration site for technologies that utilize pure and blended hydrogen and train operators in the installation, commissioning, use, and maintenance of those technologies. And New Wave Hydrogen, which is using pressure in pipelines to heat gases to temperatures sufficient to, it says here, thermally decompose, but apparently that's not correct. It is to crack hydrocarbons.
It is correct, but I prefer a different word.
All right. The innovation uses no water, generates no direct carbon, is low cost, uses existing infrastructure, and can move to market quickly. As I said earlier, having a comprehensive plan to address climate change and seize the economic opportunities that will be enabled through the transition to a low-carbon future is important environmentally, yes, but it is also critically important economically. I would say with some concern, as somebody who entered politics to address the climate crisis, I would say that the importance of having such a plan is not necessarily shared by all political leaders at the federal level in this country. And I would just simply reiterate that to have a relevant economic plan for the future, we must acknowledge the reality, the scientific reality of climate change and focus on those opportunities that will come through this transition. I would also caution folks to be careful about relying on folks who tell you that we can simply rely on technology. As a former clean tech CEO, I can say pretty confidently that while technology is clearly very important, technology on its own will not drive billions of dollars in new investments and bring new opportunities to countless communities. Technology on its own will not allow us to successfully address the challenge of climate change. To do this, we have to put in place the conditions that will enable technology development, that will enable demonstrations of technology, and ultimately that will enable commercial deployment. To close, hydrogen presents a massive opportunity, a clean energy source that can build on existing strengths and simultaneously support energy security and climate objectives. I see enormous potential for Canada. Through ongoing innovation and active collaboration, I am confident that as leaders, we can and we will ensure that the Canadian hydrogen will decarbonize industry, that will strengthen economies. It will enhance energy security, not just in Canada, but for our friends in Japan, South Korea, and Europe. And it will create good jobs and economic opportunity as we transition to a sustainable and prosperous low-carbon future. So, merci tout le monde. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Minister Wilkinson. And now I'll turn the mic over to Lowy Gunnewiek from New Wave Hydrogen.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I would just like to re-emphasize the importance of funding programs like the one that is being announced today. These types of programs are absolutely critical to the companies that are working in the clean tech ecosystem in Canada and beyond. And they provide support and vision for where we need to go as we work hard to decarbonize our industries and systems in Canada and beyond. I believe that New Wave Hydrogen is a great example of the kind of technology that we're trying to build and develop and implement. As was mentioned earlier, it produces no CO2, it uses no water, and doesn't require any new infrastructure. By capturing that pressure energy that already exists in natural gas pipelines, we can separate the carbon and the hydrogen into two very valuable products. The hydrogen, of course, can be used to clean up existing processes, for example, fertilizer production, or greening up the refining of petroleum products by replacing steam methane reforming, for example. It can also be used as a blended fuel where we put hydrogen into natural gas and generate power with a much lower carbon footprint. And so this is a great transition forward for us to be able to do this. And again, we couldn't do it without the funding that's being made available from our governments here in Canada. It's absolutely critical to us. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today for today's announcement, to hear the continued investment in what we're doing to build out our clean tech economy here in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Lowy. And thanks again for coming today. And we'll now turn to the media Q&A. Please welcome Carolyn Swankin from Minister Wilkinson's office.
Hello, good morning, everybody. As Tanya said, we will now move to the media Q&A portion of the event. I will walk around and pass the mic, so if you have a question, if you could just raise your hand, and then I can move through the audience. As well, we will have time for one question. Okay, I mean, the room's not very big, so it's okay. We'll have time for one question and one follow-up per reporter, and if you could please just state your name and your outlet before you ask your question.
Sean Posler, Western Standard. I'm just wondering if you had any comment on the decision from Northvolt. Apparently they're scaling back, and there's some question over what the future viability of the Quebec plant is going to be, and also the efficacy of subsidizing these supply chains without any kind of certainty of whether or not they're actually going to work.
So I guess maybe let me start with the second one. The world is transforming in terms of transportation. As you will know very well, transportation is one of the largest single sources of emissions in Canada, but also in other countries around the world. And the move towards electrification is rapid. In many parts of the world, you see it actually in advance of Canada. Certainly in China, you see enormous deployment of electric vehicles, but the same thing is true in Europe. And here in Canada, while it's not true in every province and territory, provinces that actually have partnered with the federal government to work on this, including provinces like British Columbia, you see very, very high adoption of electric vehicles. So there will be a market. Canada needs to ensure that we are a participant, that our auto supply chain that employs hundreds of thousands of people in this country actually continues, and that we actually augment that, grow it in terms of the number of people that are working on it. And we use that all the way up the value chain in terms of critical minerals mines, critical minerals processing. So I am very, very positive in terms of the work that's been done to secure the mandates for electric vehicles and batteries. And now we have some work to do on the earlier stages of it, which is opening new mines and actually getting the processing facilities in Canada. In terms of Northvolt, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but certainly there have been some challenges in Quebec with respect to the environmental permit that exists for Northvolt. And that is an issue that they have been working through with the government of Quebec, which is the relevant government in terms of jurisdiction. And I expect to see that project moving forward. I have no basis on which to believe that it's not.
Apparently the CEO gave an interview to Swedish media that they're doing a strategic review and they're refocusing. They're also building a big plant, a giga plant in Germany, and apparently the Quebec plant is part of that review. But that's just...
Companies go and do strategic reviews all of the time, and I would just suggest that a company like Northvolt is going to need somewhere to actually produce these kinds of things in North America. One of the reasons why Northvolt and Volkswagen and others have actually located facilities have chosen to do so in Canada is actually because Canada has a relatively clean electricity grid, which the Americans do not. It's a competitive advantage for Canada, and that's one of the reasons why we need to move forward with things like the clean electricity regulation.
Okay, and then as a follow-up, you were talking about technology not being a silver bullet for reducing emissions. Just wondering if you had any comment on the Shell announcement on the carbon capture. Quest program seems to be that we're talking multi-billion-dollar investments in this technology. Do you think that this particular technology will be able to contribute to Canada's emissions reduction goals?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly welcome the Shell announcement. I think it was a big step forward. And I think that what Shell would tell you is the catalyst for that was the finalization of the investment tax credit federally, which actually pays a significant portion of the upfront capital costs. That is an important first step. We see a significant opportunity to reduce emissions in the oil and gas sector and in other heavy industries through the use of carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And I expect that you are going to see some other announcements in the relatively near term.
All right, sorry, now it's very loud. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll move the mic in your direction.
Hi, Mike Gill with Global National. Several of your colleagues are calling on Prime Minister to hold a meeting with the Liberal caucus to discuss the by-election loss in Toronto-St. Paul. Do you agree it needs to be held?
So I think it's important, and I think the Prime Minister has said this, for us to take the by-election result very seriously. It obviously was a disappointing result. I was in the riding myself the day before the election, knocking on doors. And clearly, voters were sending us a message. And I think we all need to digest exactly what that is and actually reset ourselves and have a more robust conversation with Canadians about not only the things that we have been doing, but what we will be doing going forward that address some of the concerns, particularly as it relates to affordability that they have. The Prime Minister's responsibility, obviously, is to work with members of his caucus. And I know the Prime Minister, I think, said this morning he has been reaching out to individual members of caucus. I expect that he will continue to do so, as will members of Cabinet. I think that is the appropriate thing for him to be doing at this point in time. And so I think he's doing what he needs to do.
Mike Symington, CBC. So we've spent billions of dollars trying to control our carbon footprint, and yet the carbon footprint continues to grow nationally and provincially. When do you expect to see a reduction in our carbon footprint in Canada?
So I would just perhaps correct a couple of things that you said in that. We actually have seen that. So emissions in Canada now are down about 8% relative to the baseline that is used internationally, which is 2005 levels. And Canada's emissions have come down faster than any other country in the G7 over the last few years. So we are making progress. We're seeing significant progress in a range of sectors. Probably most particularly the electricity sector has made enormous progress, but there are a number of others. There are some sectors where we actually need to see faster progress. The oil and gas sector is one, where emissions continue to go up, in large measure because production has continued to increase. And so implementation of things like the CCUS work with companies like Shell and others are going to be important in terms of being able to meet our emissions reductions. But I would just tell you, we are very much on track to be able to achieve the target that we established for 2030. We are seeing that kind of momentum, and I think that a number of the measures that we are in the process of putting into place will actually help us to get there.
Amanda Stevenson, Canadian Press. Just to follow up on your comments about the by-election, do you still have confidence in the Prime Minister?
Yes, I very much have confidence in the Prime Minister. He is the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. He is the Prime Minister of Canada. I have worked with him now for 9 years, and I know him very well. He is perhaps the best campaigner that I have ever seen in this country, and I have great confidence that he is going to yes, reflect on what voters were telling us in the context of the by-election, but is going to actually help us to move forward in a thoughtful way, both as a party and as a country.
Josh Gapin, DOB Energy. Just wanted to ask you, some people think that an emissions cap will be a production cap and that will have a negative effect on world energy security. What do you say to people with those concerns?
So, I mean, I think those are legitimate questions, and certainly we've spent a lot of time trying to design the emissions cap in a way that is focused very much on emissions and not on production. So, for example, you would see that in the profile that's assumed in the emissions cap, we actually see production growing through 2030 in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. And the emissions reductions that we are actually looking to achieve through the initial draft of the cap that came out, obviously we've been listening to feedback on that, actually are numbers that came from the industry themselves. So the bulk of the emissions that we would see being reduced between now and 2030 are the number of megatons that Pathways itself has said are feasible for them to achieve, and the 75% methane reduction number, which is a big number in terms of reducing methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And that regulation mirrors a commitment that Premier Smith had in her plan prior to the election that she developed with Sonia Savage. Those are both eminently doable, and that's what the cap is intending to do. At the end of the day, Canada cannot achieve its emissions reduction objectives, and this is also true with other countries that are major producers, without reducing emissions in the oil and gas sector. It is now the single largest source of emissions in this country. And I will tell you, all the other producers are working on it. I sit on a group called the Net Zero Producers Forum, which includes the Americans, it includes the Norwegians, it includes the Saudis, it includes the Qataris, and everybody is working on exactly the same kind of technology path.
One quick follow-up. I wanted to ask you, how does the federal government think about the different, I guess, so-called colors of hydrogen, blue hydrogen in relation to others? Is there a prioritization there from the federal government's perspective?
I wouldn't say a prioritization, and to be honest with you, having been in the hydrogen business for a long time, I hate the colors. I prefer to talk about carbon intensity of the hydrogen, but I would say that they have different opportunities for different types of hydrogen, the sources of hydrogen. So, for example, on the east coast of Canada, the focus is primarily on renewables-based hydrogen, which is often referred to as green. That's in large measure because Europe, and Germany in particular, really want renewables-based hydrogen. They're not very interested in having hydrogen that is derived from fossil fuels. Renewables-based hydrogen is more expensive, at least at the present time. There are opportunities to reduce the cost of it, but it's more expensive than producing hydrogen from natural gas. Here in Western Canada, developing hydrogen from natural gas, as long as you're actually capturing the vast majority of the CO2 and sequestering it, actually offers a very low carbon and relatively inexpensive pathway to be able to actually decarbonize industry in Canada, but also to ship to South Korea and Japan, who are actually quite interested in that kind of hydrogen in a way that Germany is not. And then there's the third pathway, which is actually related to the work that these folks are doing and other companies in the country, which often is referred to as turquoise hydrogen. Where you're essentially trying to find pathways through which you actually extract the hydrogen and you drop the carbon out as a solid. And that's actually a very interesting pathway from my perspective, if you can actually make it work from an economic perspective and a technical perspective, because it actually enables countries like Japan, rather than actually having to import ammonia as the hydrogen carrier, you actually can import natural gas, where we actually have an existing infrastructure, and you can do the processing in Japan or South Korea. You can't do that with other types of technologies because Japan doesn't have pore space to be able to sequester the CO2. So I think they all have opportunity. We are working with the government of Alberta now on issues around transportation of ammonia. But I certainly do think that some of the pyrolysis type technologies that are being developed in Alberta and in British Columbia are really, really interesting.
All right, just see if there's any more hands that go up. All right, seeing none, I'll just thank you all for coming today and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.